The death of President John F. Kennedy deeply affected the nation and the world. Between November 23rd and 25th of 1963, millions around the globe closely followed the president's state funeral in Washington, D.C. The funeral was attended by 220 foreign dignitaries from 92 nations. The nation gathered to watch the live coverage of the funeral on TVs. This is the story of that funeral. The past speaks to us. Let's go see what it has to say. On November 22, 1963, while driving through the crowded streets of Dallas, Texas, Nellie Conley, the First Lady of Texas, turned to Kennedy and asked, "Mr. President, they can't make you believe now that there are not some in Dallas who love you and appreciate you, can they?" As they drove through the cheering crowd, Kennedy responded with what was his final words: "No, they sure can't." The shots were fired just minutes later. The president was rushed to Parkland Hospital, where he died not long after his arrival. After Kennedy's death, his body was placed in a solid bronze coffin and then taken back to Air Force One at Dallas Love Field. Kennedy was not buried in this casket. This original casket was stored in a vault at the National Archives in Washington until 1966. There were concerns it might fall into the hands of relic hunters, so the government secretly dumped the original casket into the Atlantic Ocean off the Delaware coast. 42 holes were drilled into the casket. It was weighted down with 3 80-pound sandbags and fitted with 2 parachutes to ensure it would not break apart upon impact with the water. It is still there today. The evening of the assassination, Air Force One arrived at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland from Dallas, Texas, carrying the body of President Kennedy. He was immediately taken to Bethesda Naval Hospital for an autopsy. After the autopsy, President Kennedy's body was prepared for burial. Cosmetic restoration was performed, then he was dressed in a bluish-gray pinstripe suit with a white shirt, black shoes, and a blue tie with dots. A Catholic rosary was placed in his hands. At this time, the body was placed in a new mahogany casket, replacing the bronze casket used to transport the body from Dallas. President Kennedy's body was returned to the White House, and pallbearers took the casket to the East Room. Jacqueline Kennedy ordered that the casket be kept closed for the viewing and the funeral. At this time, Mrs. Kennedy was still wearing the pink blood-stained suit. Once the casket was placed in the East Room, draped with black crepe, Mrs. Kennedy retired to her private quarters. The next day, Sunday, November 24th, on live TV, Jack Ruby shot and mortally wounded Lee Harvey Oswald, the accused assassin, of President Kennedy. That same day, the former First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, took her children, Caroline Kennedy and John F. Kennedy Jr., from the White House to the Capitol building, followed by Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, Patricia Kennedy Lawford, and other family members. She was also followed by President Lyndon B. Johnson, First Lady Lady Bird Johnson, and White House Secret Service agents, while mourners and members of the press observed on the sidelines. Approximately 300,000 people watched a horse-drawn caisson carry President Kennedy's flag-covered casket down the White House Drive, past parallel rows of soldiers bearing the flags of 50 states. The procession then proceeded along Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol Rotunda to lay in state. The only sounds heard on Pennsylvania Avenue as the casket made its way to the Capitol were muffled drums and the clacking hooves from the horses accompanying and pulling the president. Mrs. Kennedy led the public mourning for the country. Brief eulogies were delivered inside the rotunda by Senator Majority Leader Mike Mansfield of Montana, Chief Justice Earl Warren, and Speaker McCormick. During the 21 hours that the president's body laid in state in the Capitol Rotunda, about 250,000 people filed by to pay their respects. Since William Howard Taft in 1930, President Kennedy was the first president in more than 30 years to lay in state in the Rotunda. Kennedy's state funeral was held on November 25, 1963, at St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington, D.C. This was also his son, JFK Jr.'s birthday. The president's daughter's birthday would be in 2 days. Members of the Kennedy family and foreign dignitaries walked in the funeral procession to the cathedral. Those pictured include Robert F. Kennedy, Jacqueline Kennedy, Senator Edward Kennedy, Director of the Peace Corps, the President of France, the Queen of Greece, the Minister of External Affairs of Ireland, the Chancellor of West Germany, the King of Belgium, and many more. The Queen of England did not attend the funeral. It was very rare for the Queen to attend a funeral, and at the time of JFK's funeral, the Queen was several months pregnant with Prince Edward. However, her husband, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, did attend the funeral to represent his wife and the British royals. Around noon, President Kennedy's casket entered St. Matthew's Cathedral for a private funeral mass. Approximately 1,200 invited guests attended. About an hour later, the casket, followed by a lengthy motorcade, was taken to Arlington National Cemetery for burial, a distance of approximately 3 miles. During the burial services, 50 military jets flew overhead in 3 formations, followed by Air Force One. Then the U.S. flag, draping the president's casket, is folded and presented to Mrs. Kennedy. To end the service, Mrs. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Edward Kennedy lit the eternal flame. The grave was placed so that it had a view of the Lincoln Memorial and Washington Memorial and was aligned with both memorials. Jacqueline Kennedy wanted their deceased children, Patrick and Arabella, reinterred next to their father. A small white cross was placed at the head of Arabella's grave, and a small white headstone placed at the head of Patrick's. Today, Jackie is buried alongside them. The original grave was temporary. A permanent gravesite is located about 20 feet to the east. The permanent site was completed on July 20th, 1967. The external flame is now located at the head of the president's grave. The burner of the flame is a specially designed apparatus. Consists of a nozzle and electric ignition system. A consistently flashing electric spark near the tip of the nozzle relights the gas if the flame is extinguished by rain, wind, or accidents.